Attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning. Hope the sun is nice and shining where you are today, and thank you for joining us on the Engineering Manufacturing T-Level. This webinar is part 3 of our Engineering Manufacturing T-Level, and today we'll be talking about the employee set project for the Engineering Manufacturing Process and Control Pathway, or we abbreviate it to EMPC. So using the webinar platform today, please send any questions in the questionnaire throughout. Also, we'll be putting links in the chat section, so please make sure you are downloading those as we go along. There is a handout section made available to you now, and that's regarding the mapping regarding the MPC. You are set to mute, and any webinar resources will be shared shortly after this webinar, such as the recording, CPD certificate, and the presentation as well. So just a quick overview, if you don't know who we are manufacturing and the lead on the T-levels. Today, joining me on this webinar is Alison Whittle, our technical advisor for 16s. Jazz is in the background as attendee, and he's our EAL T-level support, so welcome, Jazz. We've also got our industry managers who work closely with our industries and our employers regarding T-levels, and that's Robert Stott and Scott Wilkins, as well as our other technical advisor, John O'Porter. So as you can see today, the agenda, we are going to just have a look about the core assessments, information regarding the employee set project for the MPC pathway, the assessment windows, the task timings and the evidence that we are required, what is being assessed, the assessment objectives, and then right at the end, any question and answers that you put through the question section of our webinar. We are going to give you an overview of the core assessment, the assessment requirements of the employee set project, and the evidence as well. And today we are not talking about the occupational specialism, progression, industry placement, any reviewing of the context, and the core theory examinations. Over to you, Ali.
Thanks, Sam. Can you hear me loud and clear, everybody? Is that okay?
That's all clear.
Brilliant, thanks, Sam. So, hi everyone. I've tried to approach this from your perspective, really. And every time you go to a webinar, sometimes you can think of what is going to be covered. So, I've started this with some common questions that I would want to know the answers to, and to make sure that what is being covered today is going to be relevant to you. So, the first thing is we get asked quite frequently is, will there be any additional support for uploading of evidence? So you can see in the first sort of bubble there, we put a link to the ESP guide, which is the Employer Set Project Guide, which provides any additional evidence that you need. Then we are going to look at when the ESP will be released to centres. So we are going to be sharing some key dates with you further on in the presentation here, and you can see again a link to our key date schedule, which is on the resource hub of our website. So first thing you can say is, when can I release this ESP to your learners? So there is an assessment window, and that assessment window opens on the 13th of March and it closes on the 31st of March 2023. So another question, can learners retake, resit the ESP, and if so, when? Yes, there is an opportunity for resit, retake in the autumn series, which runs from the 6th of November to the 24th of November 2023. And there is also a third opportunity for a reset the following summer series. So we're going to be looking at today how the assessment, how the ESP is marked and graded. You'll all be pleased to hear that everything to do with the ESP is externally marked by City and Guilds. And we're going to go through an overview of how it's marked. Even though you don't mark it, I think it's really helpful to see how it's been marked, because it does help inform the teaching. Little box there. There's so much documentation available and support and resources available to you. Please do take the time to read it, because it will make life so much easier, because there will be an answer to everything you want within that documentation. So moving on to here, all these questions are going to be answered in the webinar presentation today. We're going to be having a look at really a deep dive into how the ESP is structured. What do learners have to do? And also, what evidence do centres need to provide to us, to City and Guilds? How long do learners have to complete it? What do we need to do to keep all these assessments evidence secure, and a real deep dive into what does each task consist of. So hopefully that set the scene really for today's webinar, so you're not worried about what we're going to be covering. So because you'll have all seen this today, but for the benefit of anybody who's not in delivery and is in a pre-delivery who may have joined today, I'm just going to touch on this slide first of all. So we're talking about the core assessments, and learners must complete 2 externally set and externally marked exams, and these cover the knowledge from the core component. So today, highlighted in yellow, I'm going to be looking at the ESP, the Employer Set Project part only for the EMPC pathway, which we refer to as MPC. So just to clarify for this, the Employer Set Project for the MPC is 15.5 hours in total. It consists of 4 timed tasks, and the mark allocation for the entire ESP is out of 90, and that is weighted at 30% of the overall assessments. As I mentioned, all these core assessments are externally set, in other words, produced by us, and they're marked by City and Guilds. And I think it's going to be really useful once you understand how these are marked, because it really will help you to focus on the teaching of the bits that are really, really important, where the higher marks are going to be gained, even though you're not marking them yourself. So here's your timelines I sort of referred to at the beginning. So these are the timelines for your summer 2023 exam series and also the autumn 2023 exam series. So let me just give a brief overview. So on the 6th of March, all the materials, the ESP materials, will be released to you as a centre. Now, the reason we release all 4 tasks to you together is because it helps you to start planning your assessment. Then from the 13th of March, the 31st of March is when the assessment window opens, and it closes on the 31st of March. And this is the final date that you will have to have all the evidence for your learners uploaded. Hint and tip, if I can, is please don't leave it until the 31st of March. I would be using that particular last day as a mop-up because systems get overloaded, staff go off, learners, you know, anything can happen. So I would just give myself a safety net and upload as much as you can before the 31st of March. Followed after the ESP is uploaded, then come the 6th of June, you have your exam paper 1. We said it's 2.5 hours, followed by a week later by exam paper 2 on the 13th of June. And you can see there are special consideration request deadline, which are 5 days after any submission dates. Moving on to the autumn series, again, exactly the same sort of structure and it follows the same procedure. All the centres, if they register learners for the autumn series, will get the materials released to them on the 30th of October. The assessment window opens between the 6th of November to the 24th of November. Deadline again, 24th of November, and that is the date when all evidence has to be uploaded. Exam paper 1 is on the 28th of November, and exam paper 2 follows a week later on the 5th of December. So just to be very clear that those will be obviously 2 different ESP briefs. They will not be the same brief for that series. So it'll be a different brief for the autumn than it would be in the summer series. So in this next section, I'm going to be looking at the detail, really going into a deep dive of the detail of how the employer set project is laid out and what evidence is required. So first of all, we need just to establish what is the employer set project. So it is a classroom-based assessment that is undertaken in controlled conditions. More information is available within the candidate centre guidance there for you. But learners are going to be probably more familiar with the term controlled assessment because that's what they're used to in schools. It's referred to as a controlled assessment. It is not invigilated, meaning it's not done in silence in an exam hall where, you know, teachers are walking up and down. You are the invigilator within the classroom there. It's in the form of a realistic brief, and that's going to be completed through a series of 4 different tasks, all of which are classroom-based tasks and include a presentation. So the ESP is not about the skills of an engineer. It's all to do with the knowledge, theories, and the concepts of a problem and how those learners pull that plan together. Now, as teachers, we tend to refer to this as metacognition, and it just really put simply means it's about how to get learners to think about how they think, or the processes that they're going to be using to plan, monitor and assess their understanding and performance. The good news is the number of tasks will stay exactly the same each year, and they will always consist of 1 research task, a design task, a planning task and a presentation task. But obviously a new brief will be set each series covering different topics, but the brief will still only be from core mandatory knowledge. Just to clarify, we've had questions in the past. The employer set project is nothing to do with the industry placement. It is completely separate. City and Guilds do not run the industry placement. And I think the word employer can sort of confuse centres sometimes. The reason it's called employer is because the employers within the Trailblazer group and our industry boards set the project, and it's basically a realistic project that's updated every year in line with sort of new updates and regulations sort of within your industry. So that's where it becomes the employer side of it from. So just moving on to the core skills. Now, I know there's a handout attached to this webinar for you that you can download, but on page 19 in the qualification specification, you will see the core skills, and it looks, but EMPC just means you, it's sort of title of it, and the CSA is the core skill A. So the ESP is based on 5 core skills, and they are that learners have to analyse and interpret a brief, which is the employer set brief. They have to plan and prepare a suitable response to that brief. They have to develop responses using their key skills and processes. Then they have to evaluate and quality assure those processes and outcomes. And then the presentation is obviously they have to communicate and present their outcomes and evidence. So just to sort of be really clear, it will only ever draw from the core knowledge and skills that sit across all core modules for the engineering and manufacturing common core. It does not have anything to do with the occupational specialisms or the 13 different OSs that we have, because they aren't in the core, and they are assessed separately within practical assignments. So, and not within this particular series of the ESP. So what is different to previous qualifications is, you know, that you may not have been used to before, is that learners are going to be marked on the quality and accuracy of the written work that they produce for this, for the ESP. So just a couple of sort of differences really there. Now, this slide here is sort of showing you a really high level, which we're going to be digging into the detail here. So as I mentioned, it consists of 4 different tasks, and you can see there is a time allocated for each of those tasks, totaling 15.5 hours in total. And you can see where the 90 marks come from. 81 marks divided across the 3 tasks, and an extra 10%, or in this case 9 marks, are across the whole project, and they're allocated for maths, English and digital skills where appropriate within those tasks. A couple of things to think about here is tasks have to be released in order of sequence. So in other words, learners cannot complete tasks out of order. In other words, task 3 before task 2. Now, straight away as a teacher, I'm sitting listening to this thinking, what if somebody's off sick? It's not about it's the learners have to complete the tasks in order, not you delivering them or in order. So if somebody is off and they miss task 1, while you're delivering task 2, they'll have to do task 1. So it's not about them having to go back. They must complete those tasks in order of sequence. So what you can see there is the conditions that this assignment is undertaken. They are all supervised and controlled conditions, which means they're timed and evidence has to be collected at the end of each of those sessions. We're going to go into a little bit more detail on the evidence provided, and really it will give you an idea of, you can see the timings and the marks that are available. I just want to draw your attention to a couple of things here, and that is the marks are based on the weighting and level of skill required for the task, not the time allocated. So you can see something here, you know, you've got 4 hours, 6 hours and 24 marks on task 3, and only 2.5 hours and 24 marks on task 4. So it's nothing to do with the timing, it's the level of skill that is required to complete that task. So the message really is, don't make the mistake of assuming time equals quality or quantity. So the good news is this structure remains exactly the same every year. So in other words, those tasks are exactly the same. Also, the weightings remain the same and the timings remain the same. So the only thing that's different is that the brief for those 4 tasks is going to change for each exam series. So we've already looked at that before, so I'm not going to go into that again because this is the ESP only. If I can draw your attention to the assessment objectives on the right of the slide. So on this, you can see there are 5 assessment objectives shown in the table on the right, and these provide an explanation of each assessment objective, or AO. You can see straight away that assessment objective AO2 has the highest weighting, which is 50%. Now that is an Ofqual requirement because it's Ofqual who have set all the AOs, and they have stated that at least a minimum of 50% of the marks must be weighted on application of knowledge and skills. Now, these assessment objectives and weightings for the ESP are going to become much clearer when we start to unpick how the marks are going to be allocated against each one of the assessment objectives and tasks. So you can clearly see what's being assessed in each task, but more importantly, what is not being assessed in each task. So time isn't wasted on things that aren't being assessed or marked. So moving on to that, so if you can just picture in your mind where you were, this is now assessment objectives AO1, AO2 and AO3 before I move on to the final ones. So this has broken this down even further. So straight away you can see AO1 taking that explanation from the previous slide. What is AO1 all about? Well, it's about planning their approach to meeting the project brief. We know that AO2 has the highest weighting because it's application of knowledge and skills. And you can see here how it's broken up. So AO2A is about the application of core knowledge, and AO2B is about the application of the core skills. And they were the core skills that we discussed earlier on in the slide, which are in the handout. And they sort of tell you a lot more breakdown of how those core skills are going to be interpreted and applied within the assignment. So AO3, that's all about selection. Did they select the right techniques and resources to meet the brief? And if you look at the bottom of the slide, we've included a link to the sample marking grid, so you can spend a little bit more time going into the detail of that. Moving on to the assessments AO4, which is maths, English and digital skills. And you can see how they're broken down. So AO4 is about maths, AO4B is about English, and AO4C is things like digital. And what we've done is apply those to where that will be relevant in the ESP for MPC. And AO5 is about a review and realising a project outcome. So marks will be given for, did they, AO4A, realise a project outcome? In other words, was the right outcome achieved? And then AO4B, they have to review how well the outcome meets the brief. You know, what was the quality of the outcome in relation to the brief? So that's really broken those assessment objectives down further for you. So that is them all together now. So you can see we've mapped across here the 90 marks. You can see the 90 marks for the employer set project, how they're distributed against each one of those tasks. And I've referred to the assessment objectives that I've just showed you in the last slide and how they've been mapped against each task to show the total. So straight away, we've got AO1, you know, you can see the research, the report, the design, and present. And there where you've got AO4, A, B, and C, this is where the maths, English, and digital skills are mapped across the whole of the assignment. So as I go through and break down each single task, I will point out where there are most likely to be those marks for English, maths, and digital. So if you think about those 4 tasks on the other page, previous slide, this is now task 1. So what we've done is we've taken this task on its own and we've said what it is, which is it's a research task. And under each of the headings, we put an explanation for your learners to say, what does that mean? Which is a research means a logical investigation into materials and sources in order to establish facts and reach new conclusions there. So learners will get an overall brief and they must keep that brief with them for each task so they can keep referring to the brief. And all 4 of those separate tasks will all relate to that same brief. So in the first task here, research, learners will have 3 hours to carry out some research. As we've said in the task, and to break notes, to make some notes. There are 15 marks in total allocated to that. And those 15 marks are taken from assessment objective 1, which is 3 marks for how they plan their approach. You can see there are 3 marks each, 3 marks for assessment objective 2A, which is an application of their knowledge to the context. 6 marks to their application of skills to how they research, and then AO3A, did they select the correct relevance, techniques and resources to meet the brief? So just to give you a little bit more information on this. So what do we need from you? So learners, as we've said, have 3 hours to carry out this research and they can use the internet. So they have access to the internet for this. Now, when we say some notes, we're expecting about 1,500 words. Put that into simple sort of terms. That's approximately about 3 sides of A4 paper. If they use single spacing and no bigger than font size 12. So that's just to give you an idea of the amount we're looking for of notes. So they must keep their notes. And more importantly, when they do their research on the internet, they must look at and put down and include the sources that they've used on the internet. In other words, all the websites. Simplest way to do that is to get your learners to copy and paste the website that they're looking at into their assignment or at the very end. So they've got the references of where they've kept those notes. So just a couple of hints and tips there. So when the learners use the internet and they reference this information, bear in mind that they are marked on their accuracy. Can I just suggest that you warn learners if they do copy and paste any information which is perfectly acceptable for research, can they check that the fonts are all the same size and in the same colour? because examiners have picked out that it looks very messy when they're marking it. So just to look for accuracy, if they can just use that little hint and tip there. So what do we require? Well, we require those research notes from you. We want 3 sides, a minimum of, 3 sides of A4 typed up, and we want all the list of sources and references from the websites that they've used on those notes. So that they must keep a record of those as well, because don't forget, they've got to be submitted as evidence. So it's not a lot for that. That's all we want from you, is those research notes for task 1. For task 2, so this is now a report. So what is a report? What is it we're asking for here? So we want a written account of something that has been investigated, which will be the previous task as well. So what we're asking for is a written report, which is going to be approximately 2,000 words. So if we look at that, it's about 4 sides of A4 paper, font size 12, single spacing, and that has to include evidence such as the health and safety and quality assurance, which will be in the brief. Now, learners will have 4 hours to complete this task, and it covers 18 marks in total. You may, if you decide to split this into 2 sessions, you must keep the evidence between those sessions there and keep that securely. Task specific, they will have access to the internet to write their report. It's about 2,000 words, and they must have access to a copy of their work or responses to the previous task. So in other words, their research notes, they must have those. However, you must PDF those, because they cannot rework those notes. So at the end of every task, the evidence must be handed in to you. You have to keep the original evidence, but you can PDF, or in the case of any drawings, scan it in to give back to the learner for the next task, so they can review it but not rework it. I know that sounds very complicated, so if you have any further questions on that, very happy. So where do these marks come from? So these 18 marks, there are 3 allocated to the planning of this task, and a huge 12 marks between AO2A and AO2B, which is application of their knowledge and skills to the task. Then they're given 3 marks to have they selected the right sort of selection resources and techniques to meet the brief. So all we need off you is that written report, and as long as it covers evidence such as health and safety and quality assurance, and that will be something you can refer to in the brief. So task specific requirements there. They do have the internet, okay, and that's all we need for task 2. Moving on to task 3, this is a design task. This has got a lot of marks. There's 24 marks within that, and learners will have 6 hours to complete this task and gain those 24 marks. And it may be that you will split those sessions up, which is perfectly acceptable, providing they are consecutive sessions. So you could have 3 sessions of 2 hours or 2 sessions of 3 hours. However that's delivered, they must be consecutive. What do we require for this task? So if we first of all look at the assessment objectives here, what's it being assessed against? So you can see straight away 3 marks for their planning. Again, another 12 marks for the application of knowledge and skills for this task. 3 marks for their selecting the right techniques and resources to complete the task. And then we bring AO5A, which is, was the right outcome achieved, A, and B, they must review how well that outcome has meets the brief. So what do we require? So the submission from yourself, from the learners to you, will typically be 2 A3 drawings and 2 A4 sides of supporting calculations and reflections notes, using either a CAD package or by hand. So this is where it becomes task specific. They do not have access to the internet. Now, they can have access to the copies of their responses from the previous task, as again, they must be for review purposes only and must not be allowed to rework those. So again, if it's the case of written work, I would PDF it. If it's in this case for the next task, drawings, I would, if you're giving it back, it would be scanned in. So task 4, this is the biggie. Okay, so this is the presentation task. There's lots of information on this slide. So I'm going to pause for a minute while you can just read this information, and then I'll start to unpick it. Okay, so it's a presentation task. What is that? So it's about conveying information from a speaker to an audience. And learners will have 2.5 hours to complete this task and have carried 24 marks, huge amount of marks. So these marks are weighted against AO1, planning of their approach, 12 marks for their application of core knowledge and core skills, AO3, 3 marks for selecting the relevant techniques and resources to be able to carry out this task. And of course, it's all about AO4A and AO5A and AO5B, which are realizing the project outcome and reviewing. Now, what we said before is there are most likely going to be a lot of marks for English and digital marks that we discussed earlier that will be applied to this task, purely because they have to provide this in a digital format, and of course it's the accuracy within the slides as well. As in the previous task where there's calculations or drawings, it's more likely to be where the maths can be applied for. So how do learners approach this task? So the first thing is that learners will be given 2 hours to prepare their presentation. And as I said, it's got to be presented in a digital format, PowerPoint, for example, PowerPoint, or something of their choice. They will then have 30 minutes in which to deliver that presentation and answer 3 questions following their presentation. And those 3 questions must relate to the content that they have them just presented. So I'm not going to read the slides out there. So I'm just going to sort of go through, first of all, what we require, and then some valuable hints and tips for you on this one here. So what we require from the learners and from yourselves are those presentation materials. In other words, the PowerPoint slides and the handouts. We also need a video recording of that presentation and the questions. So what I would always do is I would video record the whole presentation, but I would also then we need an observation record, and that observation record should include the 3 questions that the tutor has asked and the candidate's responses to that. So I'm going to share some quite valuable tips really for you here. And this has been feedback from previous sort of presentations and examiners' reports. Please make sure that the learner speaks clearly into the microphone, because we get muffled sound, we get no sound at all. So obviously the examiners can't award marks where they haven't got the evidence for. A hint for the learner: they're being assessed on their presentation skills, and how they present is one of the core skills. So I would just say to the learner, please just have some bullet points on the slides so they don't just stand and read from the slide. It's fine for them to have notes in their hands as a reminder of that, but on the slide should just be the main points. Also, please make sure the candidate is clearly identified. Now, you can do this in 2 ways. You can either by wearing a name badge during the presentation that's being filmed, or having their name and their candidate number visible on the presentation. Now, because it's a big task, depending on the number of candidates, you may want to have only a maximum of 6 presentations in a day, which will take 3 hours. So, you know, you might want to break those up, and that's perfectly fine. When I said you must make a note of the questions asked and the responses given, you will be provided with the questions as well. So all we'll give you is the types of questions that you should be asking within that. So, and it has to be sort of just relating to the content of the presentation. I'm going to move on to the next slide because there's a little bit more information on this for you. It sounds, you know, as if you would automatically do this, but we've had a number of things where the video hasn't worked, the sound hasn't worked. Can I just recommend that you test the recording material before and afterwards, just to check that it has captured what you wanted to capture and can be clearly heard. I would also suggest that if possible, can another member of staff support within this task, because there's an awful lot as you as a teacher to manage. You know, you are recording the presentation, you're asking the questions, and you're doing the observation record. So it's quite, if you can allocate someone to support you just for this task, then it takes the pressure off yourselves. And another hint I would say is introduce presentation skills as soon as possible in small groups of micro teaching, because the earlier you introduce these types of skills, the easier it will be for your learners to start developing them. You know, as I've taught for many years, it's not a skill that learners are comfortable with, and it's something that they do have to learn. So I just wanted to sort of put that as a good hint or tip for you. So the next couple of slides, we've talked about assessment objectives, we've talked about marks. So all I'm going to sort of show you here, and there's a link there to this marking grid, I'm just going to show you where, you know, what all this looks like put together. You don't have to do anything for this, but I think it's really good practice to inform teaching, so you can see where those marks and what is the examiner looking for when they're allocating those marks. So in this first slide here, you can see this is showing you the indicative content of the first sort of 3 assessment objectives, which is all about research planning and core knowledge and selecting the right skills. So you can see where those 9 marks are going to be allocated within that. So that gives you the indicative content here. Carrying on to that, which is the same sort of slide, you can see here, what are the marking descriptors within this? So you can see straight away, they're looking for band 1. You can look at how the wording is, some elements of core knowledge. And if you look onto band 2, it shows planning and consistency, and it's got the wording here, most areas of the brief, and a range of techniques and resources. And then in band 3, you can see that they're looking for clear evidence and methodical approach to research. Did the core knowledge, was it applied in all areas? And was it comprehensive? Did they use a full range of resources? Are they all detailed? And are they all presented fully and consistently? So you can just see how those indicative content and how those marks and marking descriptors all come together for the examiners. This is AO2B, which, as we know, is the research for the core. Quite a breakdown on this, really. So you can see it's got AO2B, the core skills. It's the indicative content there again, and the marking descriptors within that as well. So you can just take that as at your leisure. It is just a case of just information only there. I keep mentioning security of assessments, and what does that to the JCQ, you know, instructions for keeping assessments secure. And I've also put a very short YouTube link there that you can listen to. But realistically, for the ESP, there is specific guidance within the centre and the candidate handbook which tells you how to do this. But what is really key is, because of the way the ESP is laid out, that may be over a number of different sessions, a number of different weeks, the easiest thing for you to do is to make sure that you collect that evidence in at the end of every session. And that may be in the form of a memory stick, or if it's physical or hard copies and drawings, you may need to keep that in a locked cupboard, and then PDF them to give them back to the next session there. Because what is key is that nobody else can access that evidence without supervision, because it is a controlled assessment. So this is just a really high level overview for those of you that are interested in how this is marked and graded, and how do we come up with an overall A star to U grade between 3 different parts of the core, which is the 2 exams and the ESP. So I'm just going to really give a high level overview of what it is. So what happens in the exam papers, we take the raw marks from each paper, and they are the actual marks from those 2 theory exams. And they are converted using a uniform mark scale, which is a mathematical sort of algorithm that is used, where 80% is the top, and then we have the lower grade, the lower sort of marks. Now these are converted into this uniform mark scale before the grade boundaries are set. So we don't set the grade boundaries and then put them against a UMS. The ESP is then converted to, again, a UMS before the grade boundaries are set for that. Then the marks for the core exam and the ESP, the UMS marks, are aggregated together, and that then produces a final UMS score, which is an overall A star to U grade, which is unclassified for the core component. For the ESP, each candidate will get their raw mark. They'll also get their UMS mark, and they'll get their ESP assessment grade, which would be A star, hopefully not to you, as well as getting the overall core component grade. So it just gives you a very brief overview of how those are aggregated and how those marks are awarded. So this is bringing all my presentation together before I hand back to Sam, who's going to take you back to the final part of the presentation. So everything we've talked about today, I've just tried to summarise in the last slide, really. So this is the evidence you will need from your learners to upload to us for marking to City and Guilds, and you've got the key dates in there. So all this evidence must be to us by the 31st of March at the latest. We were looking for you. We want some research notes for task 1. Please make sure they're referenced. We want a written report for you for task 2, from you for task 2. We want 2 drawings and two drawings on A3 size paper, and 2 A4 sides of supporting calculations on reflection notes for task 3, and these can be CAD drawings or they can be hand drawn. For task 4, we want the presentation materials, including the PowerPoints and any handouts. We require a video presentation of the actual video recording of the presentation, and we require an observation record from you, which notes down, just differentiates between the candidates to help us, and also we require you to note down which 3 questions you've asked and how that learner responded to those 3 questions. Well, I'm sure you've heard enough of me by now, so I'm going to hand back to Sam, who's going to take you to through the final part of the webinar. So thank you everyone for listening to me.
Thank you, Ellie, for that. That's much appreciated. So just as we're going through the webinar, we've been talking about those core skills. Those core skills are in the handbook. You may notice that some of the core skills in the handbook are incorrect for the manufacturing process control. However, what I have done, I put the actual up-to-date handbook inside the handout section, and these will be changed as well. So again, please do download that handout section as well, the EMPC mapping, so you'll be able to see where those core skills are mapped to as well. As you can see throughout our presentations, we are there to support you during our delivery. We're also there providing network events. We'll talk about network events coming up later. E-bulletins, please, in content. Again, we identify any changes within the specifications, updated to documentation, etc. through our e-bulletin. And also check on our website for the resource in the chat section, so please download those links, such as how to access sample employer set projects, how to access the employer set project guidance for centres, as well as whether the different resources such as the key date schedule, as we just identified throughout our webinar. So as normal, support and resources there throughout for the engineering manufacturing T level. You've got the resource always, a one-stop shop for everything that you want to see regarding the T levels. You've got the learner flyers that we've created that are dedicated, that can be used for recruiting of learners onto T levels. And then as well as employing industry boards that we have set up as well, and loads of specifications, and also your dedicated technical advisors as well. So we're now talking about that new events and webinar. We've got the next event and webinar, which is on the 7th of March, and that is our face-to-face event at our London office, our Sitting Girls London office. Again, you can click on that link there and book your place there. Or on the 8th of March, we're in our Wakefield office. Again, click on that link as well. After this webinar, you will be sent out a link for a question and answer session. And that is scheduled in for next week. And so please do look at that as well. But you will get some emails directly after this event from myself as well. As always, we'd like to support the providers, what's happening regarding the T levels. And these are a couple of links that's been advertised as well. You may see these through other webinars as well. Just to give you an overview that on T level Thursday, the government identified information regarding updates to industry placements and supports for employers as well, offering industry placements. So do check on those links as well. We always get questions is when the engineering manufacturing T level textbook is out. It's not through Sitting Girls, it is through Hodder Education, and we have been told it's a date of June 2023. Again, you've got the contact details there at Hodder Education, so do get into contact them direct for further information. As always, with any new qualifications that we do develop at Sitting Girls, we like associates to work with us. And again, we are looking for markers, examiners and moderators. So if you think you've got the actual role, you think your expertise is going to suit for this qualification, then do get in touch with myself or look at our associate vacancy website. So I would like to say thank you for attending our webinar today. Hope you found the information useful. I'm just going to go through some of the questions, and any further questions, then do put them through, as this time is for you to feedback directly to us. And I hope you found this webinar useful and information. So the first question that we had through during the presentation was, are we expecting each student present for 2.5 hours? Is that preparation and delivery time? No, that's preparation and delivery time. And the presentation session will be 30 minutes, including questions. And then the other one regarding to the presentation, assuming the rest of the class forms an audience and the teaching staff. No, it's just yourself and the learner and another member of staff to control the presentation, to making sure they're able to ask those questions as well. So that is why we've got those individual 30-minute slots available for learners to sit in there. Any other questions coming through? Or anything from you, Ali?
No, sorry, John, I didn't make that very clear to you. I'm sorry. There, in some of the cases, they do use the presentation as the audience. So in certain different ESPs, it's not. Can we just check that? Because I thought that other learners could attend the presentations. Is that in your particular handbook for EMPC, Sam?
Yeah, it's the feedback they had from the development team about learners attending the presentation.
Yeah, okay, so in certain ones, in other waves that they can. So no, I think so. Sorry about that one. So that the answer is no to that. So I think the last question from me really is, do people feel a lot better about approaching this now, because it's brand new? To have a sort of assessment like this in a vocational type, stroke academic sort of format is quite a big ask, isn't it? So I'm hoping that we've broken it down sufficiently that it makes it a little bit more easier to approach, and the evidence that you have to produce does not seem to be overwhelming as some people may have originally thought.
Yeah, John's put a nice comment in. We're there to support John throughout your delivery as well, and also any information that you think you might need or you might support, then just get in touch with us, because we're there to support you.
I think everybody seems fairly okay. It's been very well attended, everybody, these 3 webinars. And I do hope they have been of some use, because we're all teachers, you know. So what we've tried to do is approach it from a teacher's point of view, not a sort of presenter's point of view. We thought, right, what do teachers need to know? And what would I need to know? And I think we've got another session for you on the theory exams, which I will break down into some strategies to teach your learners how to train them to sit the exam, really, and answer the questions, because we're all in a very difficult position here, is that they possibly haven't had exams for nearly 2 years, if not more. So I'm assuming that the most support we can give you to get your learners back into the skills that they've either lost or not gained in the first place will help you to the exam, will help you with the theory exams and of course the ESP. Please bear in mind though, it's A star to E grade. It's unlikely that learners are going to do really poorly in this, because what I haven't mentioned before, because I don't know whether it's it's relevant, is that all these are compensatory. So all of these 3 assessments, which is paper 1, paper 2, paper 3, are compensatory. So if learners do better in one and not so good in the other, it does not, it compensates for that. So, you can draw on those learners' skills, that your learners best. Some will be great at some exams. So if you think of it, 30% is just the ESP, 70% is the exams. So, they may do better in some than others, but it's unlikely that they're not going to get some form of grade. And that's where I want to give you that confidence.
So currently we have no more questions coming through. So again, thank you for joining us. I will end this webinar. And again, if you need any further information, then do get in touch with us. And thank you for coming this morning. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.